Well, this is Kurt, and I would certainly defer as much time as Janice would like. I don't have a presentation at all. What I like to do at these type settings is just simply answer questions. And just one late development that may interest some of you, their mushrooms are not probably very abundant up in north central Iowa, but Iowa State University and our department management has agreed to an online recertification course for morel mushrooms. So if you have been certified previously, of course, everyone knows that that's good for 3 years, and then it needs to be renewed. And in the past, that always consisted of in-person training. And but Lena and our bureau chief have worked together and now have approved an online course that will still last a minimum of 2 hours to be compliant with the law, but it can be done online as a recertification. And I'm sad to say that this year there has been no allowance for the oyster mushrooms to be brought to market because with the social distancing thing, Iowa State has been canceling their in-person trainings, and the in-person training is needed for the oyster mushroom approval. So any questions on that, I would try to answer. Otherwise, open it up for questions, and it doesn't have to be right now. Janice can take it from here, and I'll be on until 11 o'clock, in which case I have to be on another conference call. So Janice?
This presentation is really similar to last year's. I might go through it quite quickly to get to a couple parts, but I did want to touch on the curbside service that you're talking about. Is great. Many of our meat and poultry plants are going that direction right now, pre-ordering, having things ready to go, and just pick up using credit cards or debit cards or just paying in check. They pick it up, drop it off, and know that with meat and poultry products, as Kurt brought up, those temperature, those foods that we want to be sure we're controlling temperature on, you really want to think about. But if your vendors that are doing meat and poultry products have their orders already sacked up, ready to go with names on in coolers, or however the farmer market requires them to be temperature controlled and ready to go, would be a great option for everybody to use. So I just wanted to put that in since you all were talking about that. And again, Marie, your board, have any questions regarding meat and poultry products and setting that up, please reach out to me. All right, ultimate questions are coming in daily, even with all of us sitting at home. People are thinking about farmers markets and getting out, and hopefully we can do that in the next month or so. And so people are thinking about it. I've gotten questions about every day this week, either through email or phone call. Quick thing about meat inspection, there are some changes that have come about that you might have heard of. Most of everybody on the call that I've listened to when you chimed in are managers or vegetable growers, which is awesome. That makes me not have to have a garden, which is great. And so if you have people that are working with meat and poultry, here's some ideas for them to get started. They can always call our office and ask as well. We'll talk a little about labeling and nutrition information and my contact information at the end. So I don't mean to rush through it, but I know people have questions, and so we want to always get to those. But the ultimate question is that I got it this week is, I'd like to sell meat and poultry at a farmer's market. What do I need to do? Where do I have my livestock or poultry slaughtered or processed? And what kind of label or claim can I make on the product? So let's first start off with meat and poultry inspection. We have federal meat inspection, which is done by USDA Food Safety Inspection Service. Those are our federal plants. Typically, you think of the very big plants, Tyson, JBS Swift, a few of the others. In 27 states, there are state inspection, and we are part of IDALS, the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. And those 27 states have cooperative agreements with USDA to be equal to the USDA program. We follow all the same rules. The end goal of those rules, we may do things a little bit different to work with our very small plants, but our ultimate goal is safe food products getting out to consumers. State inspected product is for intrastate commerce only. So with you guys being up Mason City, close to the Minnesota border, sometimes we get comments, questions, hey, can I take it up to Minneapolis or Mankato or whatever's across the border? And at a state inspected plant, you cannot. However, we are entering into an agreement with USDA to have the Cooperative Interstate Shipment Program, CIS for short, this year. What that entails is instead of being equal to, the inspection and things that we do have to be the same as. And so we have created a program to do that. And currently we are just in kind of in the middle. Some people call it fuzzy first. We're past kind of that. We have been taking applications for plants to be selected for this program. However, with the coronavirus pandemic, it's probably going to be shoved back maybe a few months. It just depends. We started out doing our reviews of plants, but we've had to stop those to put our efforts into ensuring inspection is happening at plants right now that are currently just operating. So be aware of CIS. If you go to our website, FSI or US, I'll have a link to our website. We have a page for just CIS programs, and we'll list the plants that have that. So if you have people that would like to not only go to your local in-state farmers market, but they're thinking about crossing the line, since you guys are up there, north central Iowa, there may be a plant available to do that for them. So please ask questions if you need more information about CIS. But as what I do and our staff does, and as well as what Kurt and their staff does for inspections, inspection is responsible to ensure and verify for us meat and poultry products are safe, wholesome, and properly labeled to protect consumers. So we got to be sure that those products have been inspected. Species, we always get these questions, well, what do you guys inspect? Well, this is just a slide with that information: red meat, beef, pork, lamb, goats, poultry. We have usually chickens, turkeys, ducks, etc. Now in Iowa, we have farm deer are amenable in Iowa, and these are deer that are domestically raised, and there's the list of those there. We have seen a downtrend on those species. However, you never know, we could get those. Additionally, there are some voluntary inspections of exotics, and exotic animals are defined as domestically raised antelope, bison/buffalo, water buffalo, reindeer, migratory, waterfowl, and game birds. So there are some instances where you might have other species that we do inspect. Then we get into all other livestock and animal species used for food, such as rabbits, at least in Iowa, fish, and Kurt and I could go through a whole list with Scott Platt of all the different other things we get asked about. Anything that is not amenable or voluntary exotic falls under the jurisdiction of FDA, which is Kurt's group at the Iowa Department of Inspections and Appeals. And what we tell people, if you've got somebody that's interested in doing something different, be sure to call and ask. I would say with fish, it's usually dual jurisdiction between IDIA and the DNR. If you're commercially raising some fishes, it depends. So we always tell people call and ask. Be sure it has a mark of inspection on it. They can sell single ingredient products such as steaks, roasts, etc. And we see a lot more people doing multi-ingredient products to further process and value add to their products, because not everybody wants ground meats. They want steaks. What do I do with everything else? Well, meat sticks, sausages, bratwurst, that type of thing during the summer, people want to grill out, and those are good choices. This is a question I always get at farmer market meetings, and I just had it this week, and so I put this slide in there. What about poultry dressed and processed under the 1,000 bird exemption? In our rules, there is an exemption for a poultry producer to raise 1,000 birds of their own raising on their premise that they can dress and sell to household consumers from their premise. What it cannot do is you cannot sell those birds at farmers markets. You can only sell them at the premise where they've been raised and dressed. You could have information at a farmer's market, but no sales. So you could have a sign-up sheet that say, hey, you could have a sign-up with pictures of your farm and your birds and everything and say, hey, we do this. Here's our sign-up sheet. We'll get in contact with you when the birds are about ready to see if you're still interested. And I believe Kurt would agree they would not have to have because they're not selling anything, they would not have to have the typical farmer's market license that is associated with selling meat poultry products. So you can have an informational booth, I believe. So Kurt can chime in on that. Correct, Kurt?
Yes, that's correct. The product has to be picked up at the farm, and if anyone is interested, and if that's the only commodity that they're storing for sale directly to the household consumer from the farm, then there is no warehousing license needed either because it's an unregulated product. But
Correct.
If they're warehousing anything else, then warehousing still applies and separation would be a priority.
Now, if they were, Kurt, if they were just having a table at a farmer's market, there wouldn't be a farmer's market license that you would have, correct?
No, if it's an informational table, just advertising their goods, that's fine.
Okay.
There would be no license needed.
Can you guys all still hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. I'm on our VPN with the federal government, and sometimes it kicks me off, but I'm on my other web, so I'm hoping, I did think about that when I used this hookup, so hopefully I don't get kicked off. We have some problems with the Fed sometimes, so I may ask, can you hear me sometimes, or you're still there? You can wave at me, Marie, okay? So, as Kurt said, they can only be sold to household consumers from their premise. There's no warehouse license. You can only do 1,000 birds per calendar year. Our only requirement is that they must keep records so that if there ever is a complaint, you have your records so that you can show, yep, I bought 900 birds from Murray McMurray, and here is our records that shows who we all sold them to. So if you get questions about that 1,000 bird exemption, that's your answer. So if people want to sell poultry, just like red meat at a farmer's market, it must bear the mark of inspection. Can't be part of the 1,000 bird exemption. All right. Now, this also goes into Kurt's court. If somebody is preparing meat or poultry to eat, say for a meal at the market, they're providing sandwiches, making breakfast burritos, you name it, anything with meat in it, it has to come from an inspected / approved source. And you'll need to check with IDIA, with Kurt's group on doing that. That does not fall under that farmer's market vendor license or whatever Kurt calls it, falls under their jurisdiction on being sure, because they will look at the products that you're preparing to be sold in meals, that type of thing. So that's who, if you've got somebody who's going to prepare something, be sure you check with, be sure they're appropriately licensed with IDIA. Other considerations, what are the requirements of the farmer's market have for storing products on site? Some require mechanical, some just require coolers and appropriate coolants, dry ice, etc. So be sure you have that noted. Licensing to store your product at home, that goes back to Kurt's group with IDIA, as well as your license to sell at farmers markets. That's usually the calls that I get, and they just need some direction on where to go and who to talk to. You'll see in the middle of the page there, I'm going to see if this will work. If I can pull it up, it may not let me. Yeah, it's not going to work. The website, oh, it did come up. This is the Iowa Department of Agriculture's farmers market listing. So a lot of times I send this to potential farmers market vendors to see, you know, so they know who to contact if they haven't already contacted a manager to get that type of information. So let me see if I can get back to my
Janice, just so you know, we didn't see that because it only shares the one screen that you've selected. So maybe we can just send that out to folks if they're interested.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for letting me know that. It's new technology now. I know what to do next time. But that is the Idols Farmers Market, and Paul might have that when he talks as well. So those are some of the licensing things that your vendors need to be aware of. And Kurt and I are always available for questions if something comes up. So if you've got a person that wants to do meat and poultry, the first thing is they got to find a plant. I always start off with this: not all plants are interested in doing what we call third parties. Most of them are. We do have a searchable database on our website, and if you're looking for a plant, we have a plant class called 1ACB, and that is all explained on the database that we have. Now, people ask me about federal plants. Well, any federal plant could do this, but majority of them aren't. They don't cater to the small livestock producer to do that. I don't know of any that are currently doing that. We used to have a couple, but they've either quit that or shut down completely. So that is a resource. Excuse me. When livestock producers, poultry producers working with a plant, it's a business agreement between them, from scheduling the products, formulations, what they're going to make, and labeling, and how products are going to be stored. Some plants do have locker space still available for storage of products, so it's something that they may consider. One of the biggest things that I deal with is labeling, and we have a lot of producers that want to put fancy dancy labels or do something different. It's something I always tell them, you got to work with the plant and see what they can do and what they can't do. We approve all labels before they're used, and they're ultimately, the meat establishments, the plants that we work with and inspect are ultimately responsible for the label, so they have to sign off for it. Our in-plant staff can be of assistance. Labels have to be approved first, and they all must be applied before the product can leave the plant. No additional labeling can be applied once the product leaves the plant, other than net weights, and we'll talk about net weights here in a little bit. That's kind of my pet peeve for the year, if you will, or my pet project to help get that compliance with that. So here's an example of one label that you could use. It's kind of a fancy one, but those are all the features that go on a label. Here's another one, and let's talk through some things about net weights. Meat and poultry products must be sold by weight, not by piece. We run into that quite often in our compliance checks where somebody's selling pieces of jerky, pieces of sticks, or 3 pork chops. This is actually a rule of our, that's adopted by our Weights and Measures Bureau within IDOLS. It's part of federal regulation as well, that all meat and poultry products have to be sold by weight. Now they can either be sold by random weights, where packages vary in weights and you use a unit price to determine total price, as the examples given there, or meat can be sold by stated net weights. And this is what you typically see at the grocery store. You go up to the any canned good, even vegetables, they have a weight at the bottom. Frozen package, or even in the processed meats counter, you'll see, you know, the Hillshire Farms or the others, they all have a stated net weight. The majority of our plants do random weight packaging, and that's because there's such variation. We're not making widgets, and it does take a little bit extra to do stated net weights because you have to hit that 8 ounces or whatever stated. All weights have to be done on a certified scale, and that's through our IDOLS Weights and Measures Bureau. And the weight of the product does not include packaging material. The majority of our plants have certified scales, and we truly encourage them when working with third parties to help make sure that that weight is applied before it leaves the plant. It is not required to, but most of our farmer market vendors either don't have access or haven't invested in a scale yet that can be certified. And to take it's a good customer service for them. So we really encourage our plants to do that. And we've made some really good efforts towards that with the plants, with new equipment that they've got that can do that. And I'll give you a couple examples of some labels that are used. If you have your own certified scale, it has to be certified and licensed through the IDALS Weights and Measures Bureau. And it's usually a $10 to $15 fee per year. And you can apply that net weight and pricing information after the product has left the plant. And it can be handwritten in, and I'll show you an example here coming up. It is the end retailer's responsibility to apply the net weight and pricing information to product before it is displayed for sale. And that directly comes from our rules as well as weights and measures rules. Excuse my hand drawing here. I created this last night thinking I needed a good example because this is one of those things that we look at. This is a typical label for one of our plants. It's just a black and white. We call them digi scales. You see them at the fairways and Hy-Vees and stuff. But at the top there, you have the signature line, a product name, the legend, and then you come down here to keep frozen. And here's the net weight information at the bottom. And you'll see over on the right, you'll see there's a net weight of 0.21 pounds, but the unit price and the price per pound, total price are absent. And this is one way our plants are working with third parties to get that weight on there. It's done by a certified scale, and then our vendors can price it according to the market. I know the market goes up and down, and this allows them to do that. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to get plants involved, and we're making headway with that for the third-party vendors. They also, on the left, you can see where the price per pound and total price have already been inserted. They can also do that. So that's one of the big things with net weights, is making sure meat and poultry products are sold by weight and not by piece. And if you have vendors that are struggling with that or have questions, be sure to send them our way, and we'll work with them and the plant that they're working with to ensure that they get those weights and sell that product accordingly. Now, a couple other things when it comes through is we have a signature lines, which are at the top. Sorry, I'll go back here. And how they are applied. Any vendor can use the plant's label. This one says Madison County Locker. It's a fictitious locker. They can use that. It's in a correct label. It can be there, no problem. What we find is many of our vendors or our third parties are maybe do this once and maybe not again. And that investment in labels is a lot. And we want to foster these enterprises, these livestock producers, to get them started in this. And one way to foster it is to start out just with a plain label from the plant, and then they can work up to other things of labeling their products. So another thing they can do is if they do want to put at the bottom there, you'll see processed for Hilltop Farms. If they want to put a third-party signature line label on, it can be done, and it's approved at the plant and applied at the plant. It can't be applied once the product is left the plant. In addition, the label on the right is a third-party label that the plant has put together. Any third-party label has to say processed for in front of it. And so there's different ways to do this. If you've got vendors that want to do something, have them give me a call. We'll walk through it, and usually I get the plant involved as well. So the next thing, trade names, artwork. Got to be sure you're not infringing on somebody else's trademark or copyrighted information. Another one that we get questions are product claims. People want to get that market extra value out of that product. They're looking for that niche. And in doing so, they want to put a claim on there that they've either raised their animals organically. There might be a quality statement, food safety claims, nutrition claims. Our biggest one is animal raising claims that include breeds, Angus, Hereford, Berkshire, Duroc, those types of things, as well as pasture raised. And on the right there, there is a guidance document that we use to ensure we get that information, because we have to approve all of that before that is applied to a label. Product Product claims are requirements applied to labels and point of purchase information, and you must have supporting documentation that says that you do meet that claim. There are a lot of third-party certifiers out there now that will do that, but we work through each one of these. You don't need to have a third party, but we will work through that one by one with those claims. A lot of people ask, well, what is point of purchase information? It could be a placard, handout, signs, excuse me, Craigslist, Facebook posts, websites are all point of purchase where information could be. What it comes down to at the end of the bullet points there is that the claim must be first approved on the label before you can use it on any point of purchase. That label approval allows us to ensure that that claim has been supported, and then you can use it anywhere. Nutritional information from a farmer's market standpoint, there is a requirement for single ingredient products to post, doesn't have to be on the label, post nutritional information. And so if you're doing single ingredient product names, steaks, roasts, that type of thing, we can provide you these colorful nutrition facts that you can laminate and lay out on the table where your meat or poultry vendor is at, and that fulfills that requirement. And I can get those to you, Marie, and you can hand those out as well. Lastly, we do compliance checks at farmers markets, and all we want to do is get compliance. We don't want to shut you down or anything like that, but just be sure that everything's on a level playing field and products are safe and wholesome. And with the times that we're in right now, people are wanting that. And like I said, I applaud you guys on that curbside pickup. That's just great. It's just one way we're looking for answers and not other things to be positive in that. So at the end of this, and I know Marie's recording this and we'll have this is our contact information. There's our website as well. You can get more information. And at the end, there's my contact information as well. So with that, Marie, I'm going to turn it back over to you guys and wait for questions.
Yes, thank you for all of that. It's great. And as you said, we will have this recorded. So even though we might not have many meat producers on this morning, we certainly do have more and more joining the farmers markets. So I think it's important for all of our managers and anybody involved in market leadership that they have a good understanding of all of that, for sure.
Exactly. I look at it this way, you know where those answers, if you've got somebody ask a question, hey, I know who to call.
Exactly. Exactly. So we thank you that you're so friendly and welcoming to those questions too. Yep. So with that, we do want to open up for questions for either Janice and or Kurt, because we know that in the midst of the farmers market season, something comes up and there are things that you just don't know. Like, is this okay for sale? Does this fall under this regulation? What does that look like? So I want to open it up to you all. I have a couple that I know I hear all the time that I would love to hear perspective on, if not, but anybody on the call have a question currently? Can be meat or fruit, veg, value added, baked goods, anything.
Well, this is Kurt.
Sorry. Oh.
Yeah, this is Kurt. There's one thing I might mention that Janice kind of made me think of, and that is that certainly on FDA regulated foods, when you talk about truth and labeling and advertisement and informational tables at the farmer market and those type things, those are all considered an extension of your label or your operation. So any kind of false claim like raised organic, or as Janice used as an example, you got to support your claim. If you're making any kind of a health claim, that throws it into an altogether different category, even in your advertisements. So I thought it was worth getting that on the record too.
True.
I do have a question. This is probably more for Kurt, but with trying to grow the Osage farmers market, we're trying to encourage hobbyist growers, the home grower who may have just a extra surplus of beets or whatever it is that they're growing. And what I'm finding is that most of those people are concerned about the regulations and do I have to have a license to sell my produce at the farmer's market? And that's all new to me. So I don't know any of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. The whole uncut produce is considered a raw agricultural commodity, and the grower can market that however they want. They can sell it to the local grocery store if they want, if they are the grower. For farmer markets, the regulation allows for anybody. You could be a third party buying and selling tomatoes, for example, without being licensed because they're just exempt from the law. But if you're a third party buying and selling to a restaurant, that's when licensing becomes required for the raw agricultural commodity. Now, if they start processing, such as dicing up carrots, that is a non-temperature controlled food. So you could dice up carrots at home and package them and sell them at the farmer market without a license because there's no temperature control for the safety of the food. There are those foods that do require refrigeration once you start processing, and those are cut leafy greens, which are identified in the food code, and any melons and tomatoes are also included in that. So if you're talking about just raw agricultural commodities, and I think you mentioned beets, you can harvest them, cut the tail of the root off and cut the beet top off and left with the beet root, and that's considered part of harvesting and trimming. But the raw agricultural commodity that's going to be consumed has not been processed. So you can market that however you want. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Jess, that's a great question, because I think a lot of people sometimes when they're just getting into this game, they hear about farmers market license and they get intimidated and don't want to step in without realizing that there are actually a significant amount of products that you can sell at farmers markets without license. There certainly are a whole bunch that you need license for, but those basic fruit and veg that don't, as Kurt said, don't require temperature control, or even a lot of baked goods. Kurt, can you just touch on the type of baked goods as well that don't require license?
You're kind of breaking up a little bit. Let me throw this out there and then I'll ask you to re-ask the question. And when we talk about raw agricultural commodities, that's really broken down into a couple different categories, believe it or not. There's cultivated raw agricultural commodities. That's where you intentionally plant it and care for it. And then there's what's called wild harvested or wild crafted. And that is what you hunt in the wild to sell for human consumption. And that's where the morel mushrooms and the now approved oyster mushrooms fall into that category. And because they have to be certified and inspected by a certified expert that has been through the training, that is the reason why they need to be licensed at the farmer market. But if you cultivate the mushrooms in a controlled environment, that is considered a cultivated raw agricultural commodity that is treated just like your beets. Now, we get into other items like wild asparagus that you cut in the road ditch or something, and that can be sold as a raw agricultural commodity. It happens to be wild harvested, and we just encourage people to think about all the hazards that may be associated with it, such as pesticide and herbicide and those type things. And then you get into the non-plant type foods like fish and those type things. And like Janice said, if you're going to be fishing the Mississippi River, for fish for commercial sales, the waters have to be approved by the DNR. Same is true with farm ponds and those type things. And that's a pretty straight up process. I've never heard anybody say it was too daunting to get DNR approval as long as the water quality is there. So I wanted to get that out there. Oh, berries are another one. Wild harvested berries are again, a raw agricultural commodity as long as you take into consideration the herbicide and pesticides that may be exposed to. And so, Marie, could you repeat your question that you first asked?
Certainly. I was asking about baked goods too. If you could just touch on the type of baked goods that are allowed at farmers market sale versus none.
Sure. I'd be happy to. Now, keep in mind, folks, the exemptions written into the law that pertain to farmer markets and direct household sales from your property are really intended to be face-to-face transactions. And so this whole curbside thing has got me thinking a little bit. It's still a farmer market, but if it's not a face-to-face, it might be something I need to ponder a little bit. But back to your baked goods question, if you bake things at home that in the end do not require temperature control for the safety of the food, then you can take that to the farmer market without needing to be licensed to sell it. But the key is that no part of your booth or no part of the food requires that the temperature be controlled for the safety of the food. Not necessarily the quality of the food. You can make fudge at home and sell it at the farmer market, and you might want to keep it cool so it doesn't melt on you, but in the end, you could still drink it and it would be safe. And that's what we're looking for, is the temperature control of the food. Does that help, Marie?
Certainly. I know one example you often say is the cream cheese frosting. Like, that's one that is not allowed because, right? Well,
I wouldn't say it's not allowed, but it might be, and in fact, in most cases, it would require that your recipe and maybe a sample of your product be sent to a kind of a official lab for a water activity test. Water activity is different from moisture content. The water activity, also called active water, that's the moisture that's available for microbial consumption. And if you can tie up the water molecule, the bacteria can't consume it. And bacteria are just like us. They have to have temperature, food, and moisture. And what you're doing with the cream cheese frosting, if you put enough sugar in it, the sugar will tie up the water molecule so that it protects the cream cheese from being consumed by the bacteria. And the way to know that is to have someone like Iowa State do an active water test on it, not to be confused with a moisture content. That's often confused. They're two totally different tests. And if the active water is less than 0.85, then it's considered a shelf-stable frosting. If it's above 0.85, that means there's too much moisture available for microbial consumption. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm told those tests are very reasonable at Iowa State, just a few bucks. And then you get a nice letter back stating what the test results are and those type things. Just travel with that and don't alter your recipe, and you should be fine.
Kurt, do you have any insight as far as the timeline for that type of process if you are to get one of your products reviewed? Well,
Dr. Lester Wilson is kind of the guy to talk to, or Dr. Shannon Coleman too. The timeline would be their availability to get it worked into the lab. I don't think it takes much time at all, especially if they know you're shipping it in. But I think Dr. Wilson likes to have those type projects assigned to grad students who also help him in the lab. So just, I would think not very much time, Marie, but I can't tell you exactly.
Okay.
But this is Janice. I was just going to say, but be aware the university is more or less shut down right now. And so I know those people are available usually by email, or sometimes they'll answer their phone. So we just have to be cognizant of that. But I think there's a pretty good turnaround time on those. But we're living in a different world right now, so beware.
No, it's the same world.
Same world, just changed a little, I suppose. Yeah. Are there other questions, especially any of you growers who have thought about adding to your product list and have questioned certain things about whether you could sell them? That would be the perfect time to ask.
Marie, this is Janice. Kurt gets all the good ones, so I'm going to throw this one out because it always comes up. Hey, Kurt, could you talk about canned jams, jellies, differences, what you can, what you have to have, you know, information about? That's always a good one because you're going to have people like that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the jams, jellies, preserves, and fruit butters are all identified in the Code of Federal Regulation and under Title 21. Title 21 represents the FDA. The code CFR represents the Code of Federal Regulation. And then there are many, many parts to the Code of Federal Regulation. And it's under Part 150 where you'll read about jams, jellies, preserves, and fruit butters. Now that's also called the Standard of Identity. So Standard of Identity means just that. If you want to identify something as a jam or a jelly, preserve, or a fruit butter, it must meet that standard. And in the standard, it gives allowance for optional ingredients. Optional ingredients are found, those are typically spices and flavorings, and they're found in CFR Part 180.1, I believe it is, 180.1. It's under generally recognized as safe. Now, if you're putting those commercially processed spices into your jams and jellies, you can flavor them up however and still call it a jam or jelly, preserve, or fruit butter. If you go outside those fruits that are allowed in the standard, it's what we call a non-standardized product. And a non-standardized product needs to be named something fanciful, like a dessert topping, for example. And because the standardized jams and jellies are the only ones that are currently allowed to be made at home in an unlicensed facility and sold without a license, it's because historically they've been known to be very safe. But if you want to create a whole new recipe and a whole new product, then you have to submit that for further approval. And Iowa State, once again, Dr. Wilson, has been really a partner in working out the details in that. And I think what it has come down to is that if you, one of the big criteria for the jam and jelly is the amount of soluble solids. Soluble solids, in essence, is what can dissolve in water. And the criteria for jams and jellies and preserves is 65%. And fruit butters is 33%. And so if that is what keeps it out of the acidified food regulation. If you get down to where you don't have much soluble solids, but yet you're adding a whole bunch of acidulants or acid to keep it shelf stable, it could be viewed as an acidified food, and that throws it into a whole new category of regulation. So Dr. Wilson would run essentially 3 tests on it. He would do a soluble solids test to make sure you're in the category of 65% or so, and then a water activity test, active water, again, for the shelf stability would either come down to the public health control. Let me say that over again. So 65% would put you in the jam jelly category, and then the public health control would be either pH 4.6, below 4.6, or active water below 0.85. So in the end, you would get a report and probably a note from Dr. Wilson that says, you know, no problem having a shelf-stable food here, or something to that effect. Does that help out, Janice?
Yeah, it's usually those other products that we hear about, of adding, you know, pepper jellies, things that aren't in the standards that have to be vetted out before they can sell them.
Yeah, when you get into using fresh produce in your jam and jelly, that's where it can be problematic.
Well, we've even had somebody that wanted. Sorry, Kurt, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, especially when you're talking about a jam type product, because you got chunks. If, you know, jellies are a bit more forgiving because you use the juice. But when you start putting chunks of fresh produce in, then it could be viewed as an acidified food.
We had one where they were making a bacon jam and they were wanting to can it. Well, that falls under our canning regulations. So from a manager standpoint, if you see different products that, you know, they are unique and people like them, but as far as the safety of that product, we had some real questions on it because it wasn't commercially canned. And then they wanted to call it a jam and a few other things. So be on the lookout for those. We just want to be sure things are safe. Canning as a whole, there's very prescriptive ways to do it, especially meat and poultry products. Canned meat and poultry products have to be done at an inspected plant. They can't be done at home, and along those lines. So that's why I bring it up.
I do have a question. So as far as far as me as a chef going to a farmer's market and scoping out products, am I correct to say that if I were to buy some jams and jellies at a farmer's market, I cannot purchase them for use, like using at the restaurant, correct?
Yes, that is generally correct. Now, I will say you get into these larger farmer markets and there are commercial producers of jams and jellies that also happen to vend at farmer markets. So if it's an unlicensed production of jam and jelly, you're right, that has to go to the end consumer, the household consumer, and not a wholesale or a third party. But just know that there are those out there who are licensed, and you could certainly buy from them to reuse because they're produced on the commercial market, for the commercial market, by a licensed producer. That's true with all those type foods you buy at the farmer market. You know, oftentimes I hear where a vendor cooking a breakfast at a farmer market wants to, they are licensed and they want to support their neighbor who is selling farm fresh eggs. Well, the farm fresh eggs must have gone through an egg handler operation in order to qualify for being used in a licensed breakfast booth. So any food, once a license to operate is required, then all of the food code regulations are applied, and that does include sourcing your food. Now, I get questions, well, what if we bake our own bread? You're telling me I have to buy my bread off the commercial market for my breakfast, and that is true. But then they want to further go ahead and sell their homemade bread. Maybe they put it on the daughters into the booth or something, and it's a completely separate type of transaction, then that's a home-baked food, which can be sold without license. But anytime a license to operate your portion of the booth or whatever your vending venue is, then all the sourcing must come from an approved source. Hopefully that makes sense. Marie, correct me if there's more clarification needed.
No, I think it makes sense. It definitely is frustrating sometimes, like understandable why it's the way it is, but it doesn't make it less frustrating for some small markets sometimes.
Well, I will
If I
say,
can jump in,
no, go ahead.
Kurt, this is Janice. As far as meat and poultry products go, since they bear the mark of an inspection and they must be a licensed booth, the question would be, can somebody that's making breakfast burritos go down and buy an officially inspected package of sausage to place in those burritos?
Yes, of course, but that's a little different in that they're licensed all the way through. Their meats are processed under license. They're stored at a warehouse license at their property or elsewhere, and then they can distribute those meat products throughout the state or throughout the nation, depending on the inspection of the slaughter plant. At will. Oftentimes I get questions about delivery. Are delivery vehicles required to be licensed? And the answer is delivery vehicles from point A to point B are not required to be licensed unless you store your food in the vehicle, such as Swan's Ice Cream or some of these Iowa Steak or some of these other door-to-door salespeople who store their food on their vehicle. Then they are required to be licensed as a mobile food unit. But trucks going up and down the road, they're all transporting refrigerated foods, and they are exempt from licensing.
Thanks for the clarification. I just want to be sure that, sometimes those meat and poultry products, like you said, we're kind of a different hat in that they are licensed and inspected from point A all the way to the end consumer. And so if somebody was making breakfast burritos and wanted to use the neighbor sausage, since it is inspected, it bears that mark, it is from an approved source. And that's something that Kurt's group and our group work a lot with educating people about.
For sure. I know that it is 10:25 and we do have our next piece at 10:30. I want to give people like a quick 5-minute break if they need to stand up and stretch or use the restroom or something like that. But thank you to Janice and Kurt for all of your insights. And if nothing else, I want everyone on this call to know that these two are great resources, as well as Rosa is on here as well, and maybe she wants to pop in and say hi. But these are folks that if you have these questions, go directly to them with your questions. They're the experts in the state. They can direct you to the right people. So know that they're there to help you in your work.
Yeah, this is Kurt. One last thing I should have introduced Rosa. Rosa is a regional supervisor who takes care of that part of the state for state employed regulators. Now, I don't know if you've got anybody from Cerro Gordo County Health Department on the call, but they are your resource for anything within the Cerro Gordo County jurisdiction. Rosa wanted to get on here. I guess I promised her I'd introduce her. She wants to kind of get more familiar and get acquainted with everybody up there. And so maybe she'd like to say a quick word, but
Thanks,
welcome,
Kurt.
Rosa.
Thank you, Kurt. So I'm Rosa Hockeral. I'm the new regional supervisor for that side of the state. And I just wanted to go in the phone call and, get to know you guys, get acquaintance with the farmers market regulations. If you guys need anything, you can get a hold of me, Kurt too. We do have an inspector that has been hired and trained to replace Mary Cross, who moved to Des Moines and now is working in the office. Her name is Valerie Wilberdine. And hopefully once all this COVID-19 pass and we get back in the field, she can go around and introduce herself. But in the meantime, you know, feel free to reach out to us if you guys have any questions. And we're just here to help.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thanks.
This is Janice again. Thanks for letting me chime in. And again, if I don't know the answers, Kurt, Rosa probably do, or like weights and measures, if you have scale questions, I can get you in contact with the weights and measures. We've had a change of bureau chief there. Mike Harrington's the new bureau chief there, but Ivan's still around as well, Hankins, that deals with that. So we've got resources. You just need to just reach out. We'll get you get you to the right people. Thank you.
Yes. And if you've ever met Ivan, he's not intimidating either. Everybody's here to help. So great. Thank you.